You are listening to the fourth episode of the Intern Podcast. My name is Paris Larson, and today we will discuss the Great Seattle Fire and how the city rebuilt for the better, and how if it were not for the fire, one of Seattle's biggest attractions would never exist. But let's start by welcoming our intern guests, Ava and Max.
No.
Hi, thank you for having me here.
Super excited.
So, you two, what do you know about the Great Seattle Fire?
Well, not gonna lie, I don't know much, but to the extent that I know, it was a giant fire that kind of had caused Seattle to have to be completely rebuilt. It's about all I know about it.
Mm-hmm. What about you?
I know that Seattle was built on top of a ruin.
That's literally what happened. Okay, so we'll start with the Great Seattle Fire, 1889. So I want you guys to guess how you think this fire started.
Like a torch or something.
Okay, you say torch.
I say some person trying to light fireworks at some point.
Okay, it's actually kind of random. It was actually started because of a glue pot. So there was this carpentry place in Pioneer Square in Seattle, and this guy trips over a glue pot, and you know what's in a carpentry shop? Wood. So wood chips plus fire. 25 blocks were burned to the ground in Seattle, and so.
Were they not able to contain this fire quicker?
At the time, Seattle had a volunteer fire department, and so a lot of them were not trained, and they just couldn't get it fast enough. Okay, because at the time, most of the buildings were made of wood, and the boardwalks were made of wood, so the fire just spread like crazy. But on the bright side, no one died except 1 million rats.
Oh, wow.
So at the time, Seattle had a really bad rodent problem, and so it took care of that. And so when you look on the bright side of things...
Nobody died.
Yeah, and so...
Were there any injuries?
There was one person badly burned, but that was like the only recorded injury.
Was it the carpenter guy that tripped over the
Actually, when I looked it up, it didn't say his name. It just said like a young man was severely burned. But yeah, but you guys are right about how it allowed Seattle to basically build from scratch, because at the time Seattle was at or below sea level. And so one of the issues with Seattle at the time was that the sewage system was horrible. At high tide, the sewer would back up, and so everything would just come flowing back at high tide. And so this gave them, as horrible as the fire was, it gave them the opportunity to just build on top of that and raise the level of the buildings more. And you guys got any questions so far? Is this new information to you?
It is. I do have a question.
Okay.
So you said it burned 25 blocks.
Yes.
Right? And they had to completely rebuild Seattle. Do you know how big Seattle was? Like, how much of Seattle would 25 blocks be back when the fire started?
So Pioneer Square was, at the time, the center of Seattle. And so that entire area was burned. I don't exactly know how big the population was. I know it grew 10 times after the recovery of the fire. Wow. But it was just because this hit before the Klondike Gold Rush. It was mostly a lumber community, and so the Klondike Gold Rush hadn't gotten that wave of people yet.
Did this might be ahead, but did the Seattle fire kind of open the doorway almost for these systematic issues such as sewer? And I would say this is a systematic issue, but building everything out of wood. Did this kind of open the door for those things to not be a problem anymore?
I think what happened was Seattle learned from their mistakes, and they raised the level of the buildings to prevent flooding and such, and allowed them to completely revamp the sewage system. And instead of all the buildings being made of wood and the boardwalks being made of wood, they decided to turn to brick, which is a lot better choice. But going into the rebuilding and the recovery of the of Seattle after that. So the city, like I said, was built on top of the damage. And so it allowed Seattle to start from scratch. And so what happened was, I think, Max, you mentioned that you knew that some people had to use ladders to get from one level of Seattle to the other.
Mm-hmm.
So that actually is accurate. And one of the main, if it weren't for one particular person, Seattle wouldn't have been able to rebuild how quickly and effective like it did. So actually, we can thank it to a madam.
Oh.
The name is Madam Lou Graham, and actually, she has a lot of photos on the Seattle Underground tour, which we're going to talk about later. Because if it weren't for the fire, that tour wouldn't exist. So Madam Lou Graham was a very, very smart, very respected businesswoman. She owned a brothel in Pioneer Square, and she owned multiple properties, and she gave Seattle a bunch of money to rebuild. She had a lot of connections in city council because they basically used her services a lot, and so she knew a lot of the people in power, and she helped them out. And so, yeah, if it was also, fun fact, it was rumored that as much, if not more, city business was conducted in her brothel than at City Hall just a few blocks away.
Wow.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And
sorry, do you know if this brothel is like, or the building it was hosted in still exists?
the original building burned down in the fire. But the brick building is in Pioneer Square.
Wow.
It is there.
Wow.
And I believe there is a plaque on the side of the building with her name on it. And so Lou Graham, she became rich and powerful very quickly, and the city relied on not just her funding of government endeavors, but on the success of her line of business. So she was like a huge pillar in the community. And so we fast forward a few years later. So what do you guys think about the fact that they just built on top of the original stores and places that were damaged by the fire?
Well, I did this in my podcast before this, where we talked about the Kingdom, and how basically Lumen Field was built on top of the Kingdom. So it actually doesn't surprise me that they did that, because I think it saves money almost in a sense, but it also raises us questions of like, okay, we're going to help our sewage problem as one of them. I think my only question is like, what was did the legislature have any say-so in the rebuilding of the Seattle fire, from the Seattle fire? Did they like have any input or try to help economically or socially?
I believe they did help economically, but there honestly was a lot of information on that. A lot of the funding came from powerful people in Seattle at the time. But with the fire and then building on top of basically on top of the original like base, they kind of just left it. No one really thought to like board it up or anything until 1907. Because that is when they closed it, at least officially. They boarded it up, they took away the ladders, they did all of that. But why do you think they closed it in 1907? What do you think they were so afraid of?
I'm not sure.
Oh man, maybe another rat problem.
Close, they were scared of bubonic plague.
Oh, if I'm correct, every 100 years there is a plague. I'm thinking of something else maybe.
Yeah.
That's not shocking though, actually.
No, because like the place, it wasn't sanitary. It had not been fixed or repaired in any way, shape, or form. But even though it was officially sealed by the city because of that fear, there were some brave souls who decided to continue to use the underground as brothels and gambling dens, and as well as homeless communities would live down there.
You may not know this, but during Prohibition, did they also use this underground as like during the
They did use it. They definitely did.
Sorry, I want to rewind a little bit. So the new Seattle was built on top of the old, and my question is, how did they like manage to bring the land up? You know, like the dirt. How'd they rise the dirt, or did they rise the dirt, or was it just like houses on stilts? Or
Beams. That's beams and stilts is basically what happened.
gotcha.
Yeah, no, they didn't fill anything in because honestly, the issue with Seattle being at sea level
Mhm.
was basically the moisture of the ground. So that's one of the contributions to the issues that they had with the flooding and the sewage and stuff.
Gotcha.
So basically, what I figured out when I was researching all of this was that no one really planned it well trying to establish Seattle in the first place.
Mhm.
So, yeah, the fire in a way was an opportunity for them to rethink their bad decisions. So in 1907, the underground was sealed, right?
Mhm.
Officially, with people going there of their own volition. But then we fast forward to the 1960s and we get the beginning of more Seattle tourism and especially regarding the underground. So Seattle has Bill Spiegel's underground tour, which have either of you been on that tour?
I have not.
Okay, Max, what was your experience with the Seattle underground tour?
It was very interesting because they still kept some items and some of the original storefronts that you were talking about before for the brothels and gambling sites. They kept some of the original storefronts, so I was able to see that and then learn about what you're telling me.
Mm-hmm. So nowadays, over 2,000 people visit this tour per year. They visit the underground. But one person, actually a Seattle Times columnist in the 1960s, Bill Spiegel, actually was the first person to be like, hey, we can make money and bring in money into the city if we open up the underground. What happened was he wrote a little story about the history of the fire and the underground. Then the paper started getting all these inquiries of all these people wanting to know more about the tour. And so he opens them up. He starts running tours on his own. And for him, like you said, the tour covers old sidewalks, warehouses, storefronts. And so that gained traction. And then in 2013, another tour opened up called Beneath the Streets. That started in 2013, but they cover a completely different section of the underground, which the underground consists of 25 blocks. Not all of them can be covered. And so you're not going to see the same thing on every tour, which I find personally interesting.
Mm-hmm. That is interesting. It also entices people to want to come back.
Yeah.
And for more.
Mm-hmm.
Because isn't that what tourism should do? Entice people to come back for more, but also, hey, I went to this tour over here. You got to go check it out.
Mm-hmm.
So that's interesting that the 60s was really the booming age of that.
Yeah, because Seattle has a lot of attractions besides this. I mean, we have the Space Needle, we have Pike Place Market. There are a lot of things going for Seattle, but the underground just has the historical aspect that I think not a lot of other places can give.
Mm-hmm.
So, can you see outside of the tour any signs that the underground is there, like below your feet? Can you tell in any manner?
Not really, except when I did the tour. If you're walking in Seattle, do you see like these clear squares in the sidewalk?
Sometimes I do, and they're not really, I don't know.
They're not really clear. You can't see them. But that's like the only inkling that something is below you.
Mm-hmm.
When I did the underground tour a couple years ago, the tour guide pointed up to these purple, clear squares in the sidewalk, and she's like, "Yeah, people are walking right above you," and we could see people walking.
Wow.
But they couldn't see us, and so honestly, if you didn't know about that little fact, you would never know that there are tours being happening right under your feet.
So when you look down and you see those like purple little shapes, the squares, that's the underground's there. What were they? Why are they there?
I personally cannot remember. They told us that at the tour, but Not, but I did. Oh, were you gonna say something?
Oh, no, no.
Well, when I did the tour, so I did the Bill Speedle tour, and that one you start in Pioneer Square and you go through like this historic like saloon.
Right.
And you walk down a bunch of like rickety stairs that I swear I thought I was going to fall. And there's like it's like a time capsule. Nothing has been touched. There are couches, there's silverware, there's cutlery, there are lamps. It's like it's amazing. And sometimes because you don't stay underground the entire duration of the tour. You walk up a couple steps, go into the outside, and then the tour guide leads you down an alley into a different building and then down another set of stairs. So it's all interconnected. A lot of businesses have doors that go down there.
Interesting.
Very interesting.
I know of a toy shop actually in Pioneer Square that has a door that goes down
Wait, really?
under the ground. Yeah. It's like right there in Pioneer Square. I can't remember the name of it for the life of me.
I feel like I've seen it. I know what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
There is a toy shop in Pioneer Square. But yeah, what are you guys thinking so far?
So you say that a lot of businesses, have entrances into the underground. And my question is, are there any businesses that still operate in the underground? Is there anything like that?
I think most of the time it is used for storage because unfortunately, not all of the underground is accessible, which I'm a very curious person, so I'm very bummed out that I cannot see all of it because it wasn't deemed safe. When Bill Speedle opened up the underground, he had to get workers to come in and make like the sidewalks, the platforms for people to walk through but he couldn't access it all.
Probably had to also clean up some of the sewage
Mm-hmm.
because, I mean, when you have feces on the road, that takes some cleanup.
Oh, man.
And remember the million rodents that perished in that fire.
Right.
Yeah, so
There's something that you mentioned I just had some clarification on. So before the 1960s, this was only bringing 2,000 people in a year.
no, 1960s is when the tour started, and nowadays, at least from a statistic I found from 2019, is that the underground tours bring in about 2,000 people per year.
Wow. Okay.
So
Interesting.
it has grown in popularity since it started.
This is just fascinating. I never knew any of this about Seattle. I mean, I
Mhm.
just knew that there used to be a city,
Mm-hmm.
but I've never been on the underground tour, which I think I might actually go on now because now I'm really fascinated. But it's just weird that an entire almost town will burn down and they were able to rebuild
Mm-hmm.
and make it what Seattle is today.
Yeah, no, it's a huge credit to the people at the time that were just like, okay, we're gonna start over. We're gonna still make this a good city. They didn't they didn't let that tragedy keep Seattle from becoming what it is now.
I think that's the main of this podcast, is to talk about how certain events in history really shaped Washington to what it is today.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the Seattle Fire and the Seattle Underground Tour are a huge part of that, because Seattle is such a major city, not just in Washington, but the United States.
Mm-hmm.
So this is just very interesting.
Because when people think of Washington, I think one of the first cities they think of is Seattle, and how it's such a tech hub, and the Space Needle, the main attractions.
I like how there's something for everybody in Seattle. If you like to look at tours, you can go on the Space Needle. If you like history, you could take the Underground Tour.
Mhm.
There's kind of something, if you like sports, you can watch a sports game. There's something for everybody to enjoy in Seattle. And I feel like this tour kind of it's the little cupcake or the cherry on top of the cake,
Yeah.
almost. And just adds that little, here, you like history? Here's some history for you.
Yeah, there's everything for everybody. Max, is there anything you'd like to add?
No, I agree with what y'all are saying. It's a very interesting topic. I like the depth that we went into so far. It's fascinating to learn about the little purple objects there.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to look for those when I come.
I believe I don't know what they could be.
I don't know what the name of it is. I
Not sure.
genuinely don't. The tour guide joked that it was a window,
Yeah.
and that's it.
Maybe that's what it is. Maybe it's a skylight.
Probably a skylight.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I first came up here for school, I had no clue about the underground tour. I remember walking at Pike Place, and this lady is like, "Oh, we have a whole town underground, right?" And I was like, "Wait, what are you talking about?" And then I finally look it up, and I'm like, "Oh, the history buff in me really loves this."
Mm-hmm. Do you know how much like revenue this tour brings in today's amount?
Well, let me see. The tickets are about $30 per person, and it gets around 2,000 people per year. So that's a pretty decent amount of tourist related revenue coming into the city.
Is it just one tour group that's operating, or is it multiple?
No, there are two. So Bill Speedle and then Beneath the Streets, which opened in 2013.
Gotcha. So Bill Speedle's tour, that was the dominant one for a while.
Mm-hmm.
You're looking at about $60,000 in revenue before taxes and all of that. So that's
pretty good.
fascinating for Seattle.
Yeah.
Just to be able to bring in, even though like 2,000 doesn't seem like a lot, you're bringing in $60,000 of extra revenue on top of every other tourist thing they have. So it really just adds to that. Like, wow, look at Seattle. It's just booming tourist site.
Yeah. I mean, with the tours, there are significant differences besides the different locations. With Bill Speedle, it's much longer. It covers more territory, but Beneath the Streets gives you a lot more historical context. So basically, whatever your preference is, you can do one of those. My preference would be I want to see as much as possible, so I wanted to do the Speedle tour.
Do you think they ever would open up the like restricted areas if they could figure out like whatever's wrong to fix it?
I would hope so.
I just think that'd be really cool to see those restricted areas because like I'm curious and I want to know what's over. Like, what is it?
Mm-hmm.
Is it just a bunch of dead rats?
God, I would hope not. But I mean, hey, it's just one of the mysteries that Seattle still has left. I mean, that fire did a lot of damage, and there's a lot underground that we've yet to find out.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if like the rodent problem was also solved, or
It was.
like Seattle still have a giant rodent issue, like rising it above sea level. You know, like feels like this fire was like yes terrible, but also was like
you need a restart.
You kind of needed it almost like you needed to restart
Mhm.
because clearly Seattle was not well planned.
No.
At all.
So I want to reverse,
Mhm.
right? All the way back to when we were talking about ladders being in the streets. So that means the lower half was so far down you'd have to take a ladder to get to the street, to cross over, then you'd have to take another ladder down, right? And now then we also talked about how sewage was totally replaced after the fire.
Mhm.
So was there a span in time there's no sewage? And does that mean in those little corridors with the ladders, was there no drainage?
From what the tour guide told me when I was on the tour, while it was great that they were able to restart from scratch, it was going to not be completed for 3 years.
Wow.
It wasn't going to be completely fixed until 3 years after the fire.
So 3 years without sewage.
Mm-hmm.
Can you imagine walking through those little corridors, mud building up? I imagine trench foot and the like was a big problem during that time.
I'm sure it was. I would not want to live in Seattle back then.
It almost reminds me of like New York City. You ever like just read a history book on New York City, how like the streets were so disgusting at that time because there was no sewage, so people would just throw their business out in the road. It's what it like almost reminds me of.
Yeah, and then that combined with the tide coming in, like not because the sewage was set up where it would drain out into the sound, but then when the tide came back in, it would just come right back. So it just defeated the whole purpose.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting method to use.
They really give you a lot of really fun, quirky facts on the tour because it's not a melancholy tour. It's very lighthearted, and they tell you all these fun stories. It's a lot of dark humor, but it's really good.
I would like to live during like the almost prohibition age down there, like going underground and seeing all these like gambling sites and these saloons and like I don't know, I'm weird and I find that stuff really cool. But, you know, obviously that time period was so different, so I'm not really sure I would want to live there. But I think it would be cool to just, like, witness what life was like, you know, being underground. Because I feel like at that time, it was probably the most secretive place.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, unless you were brave enough to venture down there, I don't think you were going to venture down.
Yeah.
Like 1907, they completely shut it off and say, yeah, no, y'all can't come down here. But, like, it's that mystery behind it. Like, ooh, what is down there? Are they hiding something?
Did you mean shut it off like they closed to the public? Because you said there were still shops down there.
Yeah, businesses were couldn't operate down there or anything after they were done repairing. It's just because until they were done, they had to go back and forth from the original buildings to the new ones. But because it was deemed unsafe, the city shut it down completely. No legal business could operate down there. No one could live down there officially. So people took advantage of the empty space.
Which is almost smart.
Smart, not that sanitary.
Not that
I would
sanitary,
say.
but okay, empty building. We'll have our business down here. Do you know this? If people were like, when so just 25 blocks were destroyed, were the people that were misplaced, like homes and such, because I'm assuming they had apartments, were they given like some sort of assistance? Because you mentioned what's her name?
Lou Graham. She was investing a lot of money, which I'm wondering if she was able to like kind of help the people that were displaced because of this fire. She did. She was a very wealthy woman who, even before the fire, had a history of charity. She donated a lot of money to local schools, even though you wouldn't know her name isn't on any of the schools in the area. But from what I was able to take from it is that she gave the money to the city, and the city allocated the funds to fix the fire. Because after that, they established a fully employed fire department. So no more just volunteer fire.
We probably should have done in the first place.
Yeah. So honestly, if it wasn't for her, like Seattle wouldn't have been able to rebuild as quick and well as it did.
I wonder how long it would have actually probably taken if she had not been in on it. I assume probably, honestly, probably a whole like decade. Probably more. Yeah, I never knew any of this. This is very interesting information to hear, because I've never done it, but I think I'm going to go do it now.
Hey, just spend $30 and you can see the
$30
underground.
isn't that bad. I'll take it, and I want to go underground. Yeah.
Max, does this make you want to go back again?
Maybe, yeah, because I believe I took the one that's not the Speedle tour.
Oh, Beneath the Streets?
Beneath the Streets, yes. I believe I took Beneath the Streets. But that makes me want to go back and take the Speedle tour so I could get a different perspective. And cover more ground. That'd be awesome.
Yeah. Did they talk about on the tour, like, the life of the citizens at the time? Before the fire? Like, what was life like? Do they give a little insight into that? Or is it more... They basically just talked crap about how poorly Seattle was organized and built before the fire. I can't disagree with them. They seem a little disorganized. I mean... No fire department that's trained. They really roasted the guy that tripped over the glue pot. They really did roast him. They were poor guy, though. Yeah, because of him, 25 blocks were burned. But,
I feel like roast may be an inappropriate use.
Wait a minute, I didn't even realize that. They did not
appreciate him tripping over that.
Okay, just the rats died, guys. Okay, just the rats died. No one else died.
Hey, that's impressive, because fires, I feel like any great fire you've ever heard of, like, especially like if you've ever heard of those factories that got burned down in New York, people died. I gotta give it, this fire didn't kill anybody. One person injured. For statistic-wise, that's pretty good.
Comparable to others in America, like the Great Chicago Fire.
Right, nobody died, so that's a positive. And the city got to revamp itself. Because I think it needed it.
Definitely did. Anyone else have any final thoughts?
No, I enjoyed learning, though. This was fun.
Yeah. Okay, this concludes the 4th episode of our podcast. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.